Hello and a very warm welcome. My name's David Roth from WPP and here we are at the World Retail Congress 2019 in Amsterdam. Well, thank you very much indeed for watching this bonus edition. For the past 3 days we've been live streaming every night here at the World Retail Congress, the place where global retail leaders come to discuss the key issues of the day and, most importantly, the key issues and strategies of the future. Well, we had so many interviews with some of the world-leading retailers and thinkers that we couldn't cram everything in to our live broadcasts each evening. So we've compiled some of those into a bonus program, which is this one, and I hope you very much enjoy watching it. We also have even more content that's not in all of the editions, including this bonus one, and if you subscribe to the YouTube channel or go to brandz.com, you'll be able to watch those as well. But for the moment, from me, David Roth at WPP at the World Retail Congress 2019 in Amsterdam. Enjoy. Well, I'm really delighted to have with us Barbara Martin-Coppola, the Chief Digital Officer for IKEA. Very, very warm welcome. Thank you very much. You have an amazing technological background. You've been with all the usual suspects. Your maths is probably amazingly good, yet you've just come off the stage and you put up a chart that says 1 + 1 = 3. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is we live in a high-velocity world where change is so fast it's almost hard to keep up. And therefore, for companies to thrive today, I believe there are certain conditions. We need to operate the companies with high velocity, and that is about data, software, and empowered teams. But then there is an important aspect, which is to be true to the company's identity, values, and actually having a purpose. And when you combine the two, that's when I really think companies can thrive in this era.
And what's the role of technology in accelerating the purpose of a company?
Technology can actually help accelerate pretty much everything. And so when the values are in the right place and the vision is clear to actually better the world around us, then technology is actually invaluable in order to do that.
Now, when you look at all the various different options that you have, the new shiny things that emerge every day in terms of the technological world, the startups that must be knocking on your door every second with a fantastic idea that maybe you hadn't thought about. How do you prioritize all of that in a way that enables you to scale it for the massive side of the business who you are, but also do things that are very much on the cutting edge?
I really believe in this notion of open innovation. I think that brilliant minds are everywhere in the world, and that IKEA needs to be open to all these minds and what are they bringing to the table. So forming an ecosystem of innovation is a principle of openness that IKEA has embraced. That means that these technologies and these companies have a forum to bring with ideas, and IKEA is a partner to actually help them and also scale them when they go in line with the vision of the company.
And what are the challenges for a small startup that might actually have the most brilliant idea in terms of working with a very large organisation? What do they need to do? What does large organisations need to do in order to make it really work?
Well, for small companies is actually understanding what the big company is trying to do. So it's innovation in the midst of an agenda. And so small companies that are most successful is when they can adapt their pitch into the agenda of the giant. And also understand that the relationships that are formed need to be scalable. That is, having a certain process for the giant to move and being okay with that and actually playing so that at the end the outcome is a win-win for both.
Now, you can't open a newspaper or a magazine without the words AI appearing several times every day. Some people have a very positive view, some people have a view that it's going to transform the world in a very negative perspective. How do you see AI? Is it going to be a fundamental element of your business going forward, and how do you secure that for good?
AI is a tsunami. It is a revolution, and it needs to be managed. I believe AI can be absolutely positive when the human intent is positive. The values with which we operate AI are the right ones. I believe also that AI can be a force for bad. And so there is an aspect of thinking through the power of this technology and actually employ it for the right reasons for our societies, for the planet, and for human beings overall. So it is absolutely part of IKEA. I am personally extremely excited. It's almost limitless, everything that you can do with AI, like from supply chain to serving consumers better to circular economy. It's unlimited. And so when put in the hands of people that know how to manage it, then I think it's a force of good.
And what are you doing in the AI space? What will we as consumers see the manifestation of AI in IKEA?
Well, one of the manifestations is testing actually 3D rooms being proposed to people. A lot of consumers have a little bit of like a white page anxiety feeling on like, oh my God, how am I going to furnish my living room?
It is scary.
It is scary. It's like, I'm not an expert. And so technology comes to the rescue here with AI. It's understanding you and your preferences and actually generating a pretty realistic view of what that living room with the exact measures are, and actually once this is proposed, being able to swap and to customize to one's liking. That is AI and 3D imagery combined, and it's very much solving a big issue for people.
Now, you must have huge amounts of data within the organization. How you, in the era of big data, how are you harnessing that to improve the business?
Data is by far the most important asset of the company, by far, because it helps us operate the business better, taking decisions faster, more accurately, and actually generate new experiences faster than before. So it is unlimited what we can do with data. Now, with all of that comes the responsibility on how to use it. And there are limits in terms of privacy and responsibility to how much we use what we have in order to, respect and have that trust relationship with the consumer. So being careful with that is important too.
Now, we've all heard the phrase, the Internet of Things. This wonderful connected future has been talked about for a long time and hasn't really manifested itself. You are the creator, producer of an amazing number of items, things, furniture, designs that go into people's homes. Are you now seeing that the Internet of Things is becoming more of a reality than a wonderful dream?
I think we're doing small steps towards that. And it's very much in relationship with the connected home and actually creating...
But you are the hub of the connected, potentially. I mean,
we can be. We definitely are the life at home leader in 30 countries. And so we have a very, very important role to play in that space. Now, what I really wanted to say is that for this to really take off, it needs to be simple. And it needs to be also a feeling that data is not taking over my life and is not taking over my home, which is the most precious and intimate setting of all of us. So we need to be extremely careful in the how And there is a lot of tech companies coming into that space now. And so it's tech married with life at home knowledge that will really actually produce a good thing. So I think IKEA will surprise many in the future.
Well, we very much look forward to that.
Yes.
One last question. Given what you've said, would you subscribe to the view that we're sort of entering this sort of new era of sort of where algorithms and human rhythms meet, and then actually that retail now will be significantly more digital, but is going to feel a lot more human?
I do subscribe to it. I believe that digital is at the service of human beings. Digital should be transparent. It shouldn't be in your face. It should be in the background to actually allow people to have better experiences. So I very much subscribe in that. So we need to actually get to an expression. For instance, I like talking about physical and digital together. How to actually nail that space is going to be fantastic to watch in the years to come.
Well, you're brilliantly positioned in order to do that with an amazing brand like IKEA, with the footprint that it has and the impact that it has on so many millions of people's lives right across the world. Barbara, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, I'm now joined here in the studio at the World Retail Congress by Deborah Weinwig, who is the founder and CEO of Core Site Research. Deborah, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, I'm quite honoured.
I don't know, honoured, but it's Deborah, you're an expert in a lot of things, including technology. We're going to focus really to, I suppose, the technology issues that should be keeping retailers awake at night. There are no shortage of new shiny things around in the technology space. And I think retailers, like every other industry, can spend their entire corporate lives now chasing after the next shiny thing on the technology horizon and never actually delivering everything. So given what you see and what you know, what do you think the core technologies are that retailers should be concentrating on, and then we'll delve into some of the specifics.
Yeah, well, I mean, artificial intelligence kind of covers everything right now. And that is, and I think it's something that retailers become more comfortable with, because obviously it touches on so many things. And so we're finding that computer vision specifically, because I think there's so many different companies that have, I think, very easy to implement, if you will, offerings. And so whether, let's say it's your outfit and I take a picture and, you know, I can find out where to get your jacket and your shirt and your pants, and then it'll tell me which retailer to go to. And so those are very, easy to implement for retailers. There's also this idea of, I'm going up to whether it's a convenience store or a grocer, and I want to buy an apple, a banana, items that don't, eaches, items that don't have QR codes or UPC codes per se. And so there's also now the technology that can allow, anything that is fast, quick, doesn't require, kind of a long-term integration, we're finding is very easy, and retailers are very interested. I would say the other topic that has been, honestly, is what got me into retail technology originally, which was pricing. So way back when, this idea of price optimization, and how could you put parameters around retailers to think about, I'm buying this product because, merchants always think they've made the perfect decision, and, that yellow jacket with the black dots eventually will sell. It's just the weather, it's just the consumers being finicky, it's just that, but ultimately you probably bought incorrectly, and you need to mark it down at a certain rate. And so what we're seeing is there's more science, more artificial intelligence, machine learning around pricing. And so whether it's dynamic pricing, we're seeing ESLs, electronic shelf labels, and technology to enable retailers and also the consumer to do a better job around pricing and price intelligence. And so we are seeing that drive a certain amount of, I would say, spending, and also helping retailers invest in inventory better, and also making sure that if you know you're running a certain promotion and you don't get the return that you had expected, are there other issues? For example, was the merchandise not in the store? Was it not on the shelf? You know, can you, through video analytics, figure out why the promotion didn't work as you had expected? And maybe it was the adjacencies. Maybe there was another issue in the store. Maybe it rained when you thought it was going to be sunny. And so we are seeing a significant amount of investment in, I would say, pricing optimization, dynamic pricing, more so than I would expect.
So if you took those sort of three buckets then, the whole sort of artificial intelligence world at the moment, sort of this algorithmic retail and world that we're fast entering in, what is the retailer's advantage in investing in artificial intelligence, and where do retailers need to go in order to understand it better? Because it's a bit of a black hole.
It is absolutely a bit of a black hole, but the other challenge is they are, if you're there's a very limited number of AI or ML PhDs. And the challenge is too, so I was at the Northwestern Retail Analytics Council, and we were with a room full of CIOs from all the top retailers. And so asked the question, how many of you have an AI strategy? Every hand went up. How many of you have AI talent? One hand went up. Do you know how they got the talent? Acquisition. And so that's the challenge, and that's why these partnerships or kind of collaborations with innovators or startups or larger ERPs, that's why that's so incredibly important.
Well, I was at a conference recently with a professor of artificial intelligence from one of the big American universities, and the room was absolutely packed out. In fact, it even stopped people standing around the sides of the room. And he said, this is amazing. He says, I've been a professor of artificial intelligence for 35 years, and I used to go to conferences and there was 3 people in the room. If I was lucky, 5 people was an absolute crowd. He said, in the last few years, AI has been, in a sense, discovered. But he said the really bad thing about it is that the very big companies, the likes of Google and Amazon and I'm not saying necessarily them specifically, but those types of organisations are basically going to all the universities and buying up the faculties of artificial intelligence, or whatever their titles are, and bringing them into internal teams, because there is a complete lack of talent, and that's actually not good, because that's really sucking out the sort of the academic institutions of artificial intelligence resource and analysis, which will hit us in years to come, not necessarily immediately. So yeah, absolutely, talent is an amazingly difficult issue to
I will share, though, a very
manage.
interesting story along the talent side. So there's an innovator, we call them, whom we've had the honor to work with, and this female-led CEO. And so what she herself is also a PhD. She said that she went and pulled a bunch of white papers that were written by a bunch of AI and ML PhDs. And she then went to them and to talk about their papers, and that's how she attracted them, right? As a startup, you're not paying particularly well. You still have, potentially a product that isn't necessarily tested, and so, but she was speaking to them on their own terms, and even if you're not, if you don't have your PhD, right, if you've kind of done your homework and you're showing them kind of your true level of interest, there may be other things that you can offer as opposed to, kind of the salary and other things. So I think that it's, if retailers are looking for this talent, they have to, I think, really understand why it is that they want those folks in their organization and what is the value that they deliver, as opposed to maybe you partner or collaborate with one of these larger companies, or you work with some of the startups that have that talent. But talent is really what's going to be the true win here for everyone. And I think, and having just a strategy that you follow. And I also think you've got, kind of strategy A and strategy B, because what we find sometimes is, right, the bright, shiny object, as we talked about before, is strategy A. That's not always going to come through, and strategy B is much more realistic. And so I do think following that, and there is, I think, a very clear path. And and it's an 18 months to a 3-year plan of what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, and how data starts to become, part of your organization and part of your decision process.
So let's look at another one of those buckets. Let's have a look at sort of computer vision, because actually computer vision does have the capability of changing everything. We've lived through a whole different generations of compute power, computers doing very different things, but computers have never been able to see in a sense, and then make decisions on the basis of what they can see. What, you know, if you take computer vision to its logical conclusion in the next 3, 4 to 5 years, what do you think that will enable retailers to do that they can't do at the moment, and how's that going to benefit them?
So depending on, right, there's numbers anywhere, let's call it 7 to 8% out of stock levels. Well, there are companies that exist right now that, from a computer vision perspective, can tell you what SKU and what your in-stock level is or what your out-of-stock issue is. And so if you could be in stock on every item all the time, theoretically, once again, data that we've heard, your comps could go up anywhere between 150 and 300 basis points. So that's from doing nothing except having the product in the store that the customer wants to buy, and which is, theoretically, I understand how difficult retail is, so I'm not going to say any of it's easy. But if you can just have the product availability for the consumer when they come in, that is, something that could change the overall ballgame for consumers. Also, if, right, as we're going to unstaffed stores, and maybe that's just from a convenience store model, but maybe in some cases, right, right now there's a lot of, I think any of us who've been into let's call it self-checkout, which can be a little bit clunky. But if we can have an unstaffed experience where, once again, right, we can just kind of fly through there through computer vision, it makes the physical experience so much different, because I think there is a social part of being in a physical store. It's just we need to remove some of the friction.
Now, you're in an interesting position to see maybe some new startups that are new on the block in the startup arena, which is, where a lot of this technology has emanated from, the technology we take for granted, started up in the startup space, and maybe some of the big boys came up and bought them, or they did it themselves. What's hot in the startup space at the moment?
Last mile, grocery tech, automation, so anything where you're seeing robotics and AI combined, because, right, the consumer wants it, they don't even want it in a day, they want it in an hour. And so, right, so we spend a lot of time in China, so where you have Meituan and Ele.me and other kind of very fast delivery mechanisms, so, right, this idea of 30-minute delivery. But, right, we don't necessarily have the same infrastructure in other parts of the world. And so if you can almost have a network effect in large cities, and even in smaller cities where you have, whether it's underground, and this is happening, so there are startups who are very well funded who have done this. So they have underground warehouses and above ground, and we're seeing this from several startups, and they can then almost have like a network effect. So in these cities, if you need it that same day, or if you need it in 30 minutes, and if it's grocery versus if it's fashion, and imagine if you could have, so if, number one, you forgot your tie and you've got a meeting that day, or if you brought 2 left shoes, which has certainly happened or I brought a black shoe and a blue shoe, so, right, it's
luckily I don't have a problem with the tie.
Yes,
so,
but
right.
some of these things have happened to all of us when we travel. But I do think what's very interesting is, right, let's say you're going to an event that night and you want to try on something new. So if you could have kind of a delivery service bring a bunch of items, you could try them on and you keep the one that you want. Because the challenge is that if you ship all these things to your home and you try them on, and a few weeks later you get around to returning them, those are immediate markdowns for the retailers. And so to me, when you have a return rate of, let's say on average, about 40%, and that's across many categories, and what's fascinating is it doesn't matter if you buy it in store or if you buy it online, because many times in the store you're not trying goods on anyways. And so I look almost as this like nirvana, as you have, and also it starts to change interaction. So, right, if I can come to your home, maybe I stay outside on the porch while you try everything on, or hey, if you look at me as a stylist and your partner, you invite me in to also kind of, and maybe I have some shoes and I have other items that you may want to purchase from me, or maybe not. But I do start to see last mile and as a real opportunity. And right, we've got all kinds of last mile companies that are.
When you look at last mile, is speed the new black in that instance?
Absolutely. I think that's, I haven't heard people say that, but I think that is speed and accuracy. And also too with grocery, right? So grocery in the US is, let's call it food, so food at home and food away at home are $1.1 trillion industry. Grocery is said to be about 700 billion. So to me, my roots are in grocery. It was always amazing to me that everyone focused on fashion because and for grocery to be disrupted, right? And so what we're seeing right now too that's very interesting is, right, you have very large grocers, but also the regionals who are kind of banding together because they've got some real challenges. And so I think, and grocery tech, right? So a lot is computer vision and going back to kind of being in stock. So it's last mile, it's being in stock, it's figuring out your promotions. How does the weather, hey, if it's a hot day, right, I want to go in and get a cold drink. If it's a cold day, I want hot cocoa and I want chicken noodle soup. So, there is a significant opportunity, and we want to check out quickly. So, and I think there's also this, very much, it goes back to this social component. So I've always had this dream. I'm leaving my home, my apartment, whatever it is, I'm leaving the office, and I haven't seen people in a while because, you and I live on a plane, and, but I can tell people, right, like I'm going to my neighborhood, grocer, meet me there, right? So let's go there, let's grab a bite, let's grab some coffee, whatever it is, and so that it starts to become more this ecosystem, platform, network effect, whatever kind of term you want to use, and I think that it starts to become something more.
Well, we're almost out of time. I've got one last question
Of course.
for you. Okay, so in this crazy speed is a new black world that we are either living in or we're certainly hurtling towards, how would you define in a couple of words the era that we're in, the moment that we're in, rather?
I think we're in an era where not only does the consumer want to do good, but the retailers, the brands, et cetera, do as well. They don't always know what that is, but we're seeing sustainability is such an important part, right? Re-commerce is so important right now, rentals. And so I think everyone's trying to figure out, so we talked to somebody the other day, we were brainstorming with them about, right, what if you could go into a retailer and bring all your goods that you don't want anymore, and they could actually help you sort through that. So whether it was, going to go to, let's say, a thrift shop, or whether it was going to go to any one of these different companies that could sell your goods for you, but you felt good about purchasing and about utilizing, the product you had and about buying new. But this idea of how can everyone kind of work together to be in a more sustainable world, and kind of this whole idea of, right, only keep what sparks joy for you. So I've always looked at it as fewer better things, but I do think there's this sustainable, and as everyone wants to give back and work together, I think there's a huge opportunity for retailers to be at the center of that.
Well, as a hoarder, I found that concept really frightening. My wife would love it. But, Deborah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Well, I've now been joined by James Bidwell, who is the founder of Springwise and also the CEO of Reset. James, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Very nice to see you. My gosh, things are happening fast.
Things are moving. Today is the slowest it'll ever be for the rest of our lives, believe it or not.
That's a scary thought.
It's a scary thought.
How do we cope with this pace of change? I suppose more fundamentally, how does a business cope with this pace of change?
So it is the question of the day. It's no surprise that this conference is all about high velocity. And the first thing I think we have to do is awareness. And actually, it's the first time I've ever seen the retail industry at large kind of taking note that disruption and change is happening at such a rapid pace. I mean, I think what we say, certainly at Springwise, is the first thing to do is to be aware of it, and the second is to see what's happening every day. So at Springwise, as you know, we're providing the kind of the latest innovations and ideas from all around the world, looking at the outliers. And if you can see those emerging kind of thoughts and what the kind of the young graduates, the incubators, the startups are doing, then you can sort of start to map the landscape. And so that awareness is the first point.
Now, just to unpack a little bit of that.
Yeah.
I don't know, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, when you wanted to go and look at innovations, you looked at America and you might have looked at European cities for some of the fashion areas. Are you seeing from your trend scouts around the world that a lot of these new innovations, new ideas are coming from Asia and maybe from India and from Indonesia and places like that?
So it's a brilliant question. So the first thing is now, you know, you don't have to travel, which is to go and see these places. I mean, although it is still brilliant to experience place and be in real life, but we have scouts in 190 countries. We're seeing big trends of new ideas coming from India, China, South America. Are really where we're seeing a lot of emerging innovations, and we're seeing a lot more kind of interesting things coming through. We're also seeing a huge macro trend on number of sustainable innovations and social innovations. But the geographical reach, you know, without that, at the beginning it was all West Coast California, you know, stuff in London and the startup scenes, the obvious places, Berlin. But now we're seeing much more in emerging markets, and we're seeing really interesting non-tech innovations, as well as, of course, the tech stuff that you would obviously think of.
Okay, so the first thing was awareness. What's the second thing?
Well, the second thing is, so if you have the awareness and the intelligence, so you have that, then it's like the agility to actually have impact. So what was a great speaker this morning talking about one of the key tenets in retail is action, and, you know, the ability to execute and do that in a very flexible and agile way. So a lot of what we're doing with Reset, our consultancy business, is we're helping businesses be flexible enough and create a culture where there is empowered decision making, and there is kind of the license, if you like, to make the right decision at the right time in order to move the business on. So the age of the hierarchical kind of are you being served model of kind of downward kind of management, you know, is over, and you need to have, you know, organisations that are almost organic and then can react and respond to the change.
A lot of people talk the talk, but are companies really reorganising themselves so there isn't a hierarchical structure in the way in which they make decisions?
So some are, some aren't, and it's amazing when you come across an enlightened CEO. So I think the kind of one of the big things for the CEOs of the future is kind of having that agile and flexible mindset. And when you find the guys or the ladies who are in that mindset, it is amazing the transformation that they are starting to affect. But the kind of two things: one is it takes a long time. So, you know, shifting culture is a very, very long-term kind of issue. And if the market is shifting faster than you can shift your culture, then it's then you are in trouble. But I think we are seeing the enlightened businesses, and it's usually before they go downhill. So the ones that sort of are right in trouble, then they're kind of firefighting, particularly some of the UK retailers at the moment, the department store, Debenhams, people like that. It's very, very difficult for them to come back. But the more enlightened ones, so you look at Selfridges, they're transforming, they're agile, they're doing new stuff all the time.
So what's the delta between the ones who are going to thrive and prosper and the ones that are going to find life very difficult in the next few years?
Again, I think it's mindset, people, awareness of what's happening, the understanding and the reckoning that, again, the pace of change is accelerating faster and faster every day, and hiring people who can cope with that, and hiring people who are open and not kind of in that sort of old hierarchical thing, just want the kind of more of a linear progression through their lives, but who are welcoming this exponential world in which we live.
So one last question, James. How would you summarise, maybe in one word, or maybe two, I'll let you have two, the times we're living in today?
It's a very, very good question. In some ways scary, because the whole climate change thing, which we mustn't forget, but in other ways amazingly energising. So scary and energising.
Well, that's a nice yin and yang to finish with. James Bidwell, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Brilliant to see you, David. Thank you.
Well, at the start of the World Retail Congress here in Amsterdam, we launched in conjunction with the World Retail Congress the BrandZ Top 75 Most Valuable Global Retail Brands. And you can get a copy of that report, which also includes some key insights that I know you'll find very valuable. All you need to do to get hold of that report is just download it from www.brandz.com. Well, if you can't wait to find out who's on that list, all you need to do though is just watch this to see the BrandZ Top 75 Most Valuable Global Retail Brands for 2019. Well, it's really nice to have in our studio here at the World Retail Congress in Amsterdam, Stacey Widlitz, who's the founder and president of SW Retail Advisors. Stacey, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Great to be here.
It's a hell of a roller coaster for investors at the moment.
That's an understatement, yes.
Where do you place your bets now in order to make sure that you deliver superior returns for the people who are giving you your money to invest?
Yeah, you know, it's so difficult right now because we heard a lot at the conference here about the fact that every day there's a tweet about tariffs and there's changes and it's so unpredictable. Retailers are really struggling with how do we manage our business? And it's not just about tariffs between China and the US, it's the UK, it's Brexit, it's when is this uncertainty going to end? So everybody's got all these different cost scenarios. And at the same time, they're trying to invest in sustainability. So, you know, I look at the retailers and say, who's really driving traffic and who really understands the consumer and is actually trying to personalize, and that's another subject we heard a lot about at this conference.
And why is personalisation now, do you think, a driver of superior shareholder performance?
I think that the customer wants to feel like they're special. They want an experience. They want to leave with a memory. I heard someone say that on a panel yesterday, and I thought that was a great description. It's about leaving the store with a memory and an imprint. And I think the retailers that are able to do that are the ones that will continue to gain share, and also just the ones that are simply listening to what their customers want.
How difficult is it to look at a quarter-by-quarter performance and really understand what's the underlying trend of those specific retailers?
It's very difficult, and I think that's why a lot of companies, specifically retailers, are moving away from quarterly guidance, and also why, you know, years ago we saw retailers report monthly sales. That's gone. I mean, with the exception of a few, of course, because you have all of these unpredictable factors, whether it's weather or tariffs or, you know, it's very difficult. So looking at it on an annual basis makes a lot more sense. And, you know, even basic things like if you think about the tariffs that are coming in, you can't raise prices overnight. It takes at least 30 days to flow through the system. So to have to manage that and expectations on a quarterly basis is just impossible these days.
So we're in the realms of, I don't know, China looking outwards, the rest of the world looking inwards. Maybe that's one lens to have a look at it, but we're certainly in the world of a slightly less freer trade agreements than there have been in the past. What impact do you think that's going to have for the retail industry, its relationship with Wall Street, and also the ability to pass on pricing?
Well, I think that there's no doubt, and retailers have talked about this, that they will have to pass on pricing.
To its full extent, or will somewhere in the system be able to absorb an element of the new tariffs?
So I think everybody's going to share in the pain.
Right.
So I think the retailers and the brands will, of course, go back to their vendors and say, listen, you got to do better, and here's the situation. And then whatever they can't squeeze out of there, they will pass on to the consumer. And I think that, again, this will take some time. So these price increases will likely happen in Q4, just in time for the holiday. Yes. Happy holidays. And
so really this year, buy early.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's the interesting thing, is that if the consumer is reading all the headlines, perhaps if they're thinking about a big ticket item and maybe, you know, saying, oh gosh, the prices are going to go up so much, maybe I buy it now. So maybe it helps right now, but hurts when we really need it in the holiday period. And then, of course, what happens? Prices go up, but then everybody has to discount to get everybody interested and start moving traffic. So I think it has a significant effect.
Do you think that anybody will win in this trade war?
No, I mean it's tough, but obviously some will be hurt more than others. Like if you think about the dollar stores and the low price stores that have higher exposure, or the toy industry that has higher exposure to China, the footwear industry is more exposed to China and perhaps takes longer to move out. But the good news is this, for a lot of the apparel sector, I mean, PVH that owns Tommy Hilfiger, that was at the conference, The Gap, they have all talked about the fact that they have decreased their exposure significantly to China over the past couple of years. I think PVH was 40% exposure to China just 3 years back. Now they're 20. So it's already moved out and moved to places like Vietnam. The risk is that if there's this huge rush out of China to places like Vietnam, that there's inflation there as well.
Yeah. Well, you spend a lot of your time advising the investment community as to what to do with their money. From a retail perspective, where's the hot money going to in terms of sectors, areas?
Right now, it's still very much about footwear. Right. It's about the retro trend. It's about footwear. It's about, you know, the comeback clearly of Nike, the technical product, and certainly what they're doing in women's wear. And of course, it's about athleisure, but combined with real technical, and that's of course Lululemon, and also I would think.
What is the great success of Lululemon? It's you know, it's definitely on a resurgent, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, they had a misstep many years back with some of their fabrics, and you know the famous see-through fabric incident, and they've really come back from that, and they just have a brand that has such strong technicals and such great consumer loyalty, and they still have a ways to go to improve their tops business. And I would say also that I think to some extent they have increased their sizes as well online, which is another theme that we heard about this conference. So some of the athleisure brands are now starting to actually speak to real women that are on average, I think 70% of women in the US are size 14 or higher. And I think some brands are finally starting to say, listen, we're going to start to embrace the average woman and speak to her and not exclude her.
Well, it's very difficult to predict the street and the city from 1 hour to another.
Yes.
But it's going to be an interesting 12 months. What are your couple of interesting predictions, you would say, for the next 12 months?
For the next 12 months, you know, I still think the retailers that are driving traffic, like a Target, that are looking at who are the specialty players who are not getting it right, and they're actually taking those businesses like the lingerie business, perhaps that Victoria's Secret's had to stumble, and putting it in their box and giving the consumer what they want, I think, and they're doing it in a private label manner, so they have to be less promotional, I think. So that's a winner. And I think still some of the luxury guys that are speaking to a younger consumer, LVMH has never looked better. And then I think, of course, also you're starting to see the trend of all the digitally native brands start to open stores. Yes. So yesterday...
And also appear in other people's stores as well.
Yes, appear inside stores.
Yes.
So all of this Armageddon store closings now, we're starting to have a different conversation, which is the digital brands are now going real life.
And that's a little bit, it's either ironic
or it's absolutely
part
ironic.
Of the wonderful sort of hurly-burly world of retail. Stacey, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Well, I've now been joined by Janet Liriano, who is the co-founder and the CEO of Made Man. Janet, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You've just done a keynote talk here at the World Retail Congress.
Yeah, it was a great experience. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. The technology field at the moment, it feels like there are a zillion things all going on in parallel. When you look at each one of them, it's the new squeaky, newest, best thing. How do you cut through that clutter and understand actually what are the key things that we should concentrate on from a retail and consumer perspective?
Yeah, there's always a shiny new toy in terms of what's going to solve the challenge in the retail space, and cutting through the noise really requires an understanding of what's the foundational technology that's needed to make something work. So I'll pick 3 buzzwords: smart fabric and wearables, machine learning, computer vision, and blockchain, and then we'll talk about what I would, as an executive at a retail group, would be considering. For something like smart fabric, batteries is actually where most of the attention needs to be, and washability of the technology. Those are the two challenges that will really unlock its potential. So if we're chasing wearables without solving for those basic challenges, we're not really going to create a product that people are really going to want, which I think we saw when wearables were at the peak of their hype cycle. If we think about something like computer vision and machine learning and all the excitement around data, what's really important to consider is where are your data sets coming from, what's training the machine that's learning, and is it the right information? And that takes a long time to really determine what points are useful and what are not, and that requires time. So while there's a lot of focus and hype around those two technologies, there needs to be, a more reasonable approach to what's really needed first to make them really possible. And when you think about blockchain very quickly, it's the same thing. The power for powering such applications is pretty complex, and is the user interface and the user experience scalable and usable for retailers? So when we see something shiny, what we have to ask ourselves is what's underneath the shine, and is that ready? And if that's ready, then you can chase the sector.
Well, let's unpack some of those things. Let's talk about smart fabrics to start with. I don't know, it felt like 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago, smart fabrics, everyone was talking about it, and it was the newest thing. We were all going to be wearing stuff that integrated within the Internet of Things. That hasn't happened, so why, I suppose?
Yeah, so...
And what can we learn from that?
Yeah, and I spent many, many years working in that space, and I still do. The why comes back down to, a misunderstanding of power and what's required. So people were imagining a world where fabrics could change color and your jacket could heat up at the drop of a hat, and, shoes that could track your every step. But nobody was really wondering what's going to power these devices and where are those batteries going to live. And when we were trying to build those technologies, there was a realization that the current components and things that exist were designed for things like computers and laptops, which never make it into a washing machine. So there's a real need at the industrial level to invest in redesigning a lot of those traditional technologies for a flexible application like smart fabric. So I think when retailers were trying to innovate by creating those products, you ended up getting this Frankenstein approach that wasn't really acceptable for the user. But that future is inevitable. It's just a matter of time.
And what's going to concentrate the time now in terms of when we will see those sort of smart fabrics more commercialised in your local high street?
I think that and as often happens, the tech industry will likely drive it first. There's a lot of talk that Apple's, secret mission now is to become a wearable company. And you kind of saw that with the Apple Watch and their recent filing of a lot of patents around the smart fabric space. But I think the retail industry has an opportunity to re-recognize itself as some of the first technology that humans ever made. And if retailers take that challenge and say, you know what, this is our space to really provide value, working closely with innovative startups and having more realistic expectations around ROI, there's an opportunity to capture that value within the next 5 to 10 years. I think that's when we'll really start to see meaningful applications largely centered around user comfort, things like heated jackets or shoes for diabetics. The function is really going to drive mass application. But retailers need to remember that our space is technical too, and be willing to take on that risk.
Now, let's focus a little bit on blockchain.
Sure.
It's difficult to have a technological conversation anywhere at the moment without somebody mentioning blockchain.
Yeah, it's the beast of the hour. Yeah.
What are the practical applications of blockchain for retailers? Is it at the supply distribution end of the spectrum, or is it at the consumer end of the spectrum?
I think that really it's on both sides, but what I would say is most relevant and immediately useful is the implications on the supplier side. But there's a need to integrate with IoT, and I'll explain that in a little more detail. If you can imagine a world where your suppliers and your contract manufacturers all know when a certain amount of product is ready and automatically ship things on time because there's just this constant awareness of when things are being completed, or if you could verify that the cotton that you sourced is the cotton that you sourced and that it's the right staple length and all of those things, the blockchain really makes that possible if you have verified users providing this information and you have these contracts and transactions that allow things to happen. But the infrastructure that needs to be laid underneath that is not quite there yet. Blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum are public and really not that useful for enterprise level sorts of applications because companies will want that information to be private. And there's a fair amount of training that needs to happen at the supplier side to onboard them to any private blockchains that you may want to use so that their information is being included in that ecosystem. And I think if the retail industry sees blockchain as a collective effort instead of building in isolation and in silos, will really accelerate its scalability. But right now, all of our efforts are being fractured.
And who are going to be the big providers of blockchain technology? I mean, when you look at other parts of the tech industry, other parts of the tech industry that retailers interface with, there are usual suspects in those.
Yeah.
Who are the go-to people now for blockchain?
I definitely think what IBM is doing over with the Hyperledger and Fabric, which is within that ecosystem, is really interesting. They also are incubating a fair amount of startups that are focused on the retail sector, so I'd recommend looking into their efforts. Microsoft Azure is also doing a fair amount of interesting things on the private blockchain side. EOS and Blockstack on the public end of things really want to provide consumer-facing blockchain-based solutions for retailers, which is interesting as well, but a little further afield. I think early on, it's best to work with companies that are used to enterprise and are used to that level of scale. But there's a fair amount that's happening in the public space that's good to keep an eye on.
Well, we can't leave without talking a little bit about artificial intelligence.
AI, what an ethical problem.
So who does control the ethics of AI then?
There isn't a central group, right, that controls the ethics of AI, which really means that at the team level, we're hyper aware of who's at the table, right? And the mistakes can be small and embarrassing in terms of something not recognizing a human appropriately, or massively problematic like programming in bias. So while there's no central group that's organizing that, I think it's every retailer's responsibility to consider who should be at this table as we create or work to develop artificial intelligence, because our human intelligence is fraught with flaw. So anything that we build is going to have in our challenges there as well. So I think the key thing there is to know what you don't know and make sure that you surround yourself and that your team is filled with people that might be able to catch those blind spots. But it's an interesting journey, and I also think that's further afield than people think it is, but we're getting there. It's a process.
So looking into your crystal ball, which is probably
take it out,
slightly more,
take a look.
Maybe accurate, or at least maybe has a more peripheral vision than most people's crystal.
My crystal
yes.
big orb. Yeah.
What do you see? How's it going to affect us as retailers
AI?
and consumers across the piece?
Across the piece. I really think, and I've said this before, that there will be no tech products. There will just be smart products, which I think is the exciting transformation the retail space can really take advantage of if they're aggressive about owning it, versus tech companies, which are fast realizing that they will become obsolete, pushing into our sector. So I see a future where you walk outside and your clothes respond to the weather, and your car drives itself, and all the sensors know how you're doing, and a lot more. And to build that ecosystem, it's really a collaborative effort across industries.
Well, Janet, co-founder and the CEO of Made Man, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.